Hi, I'm Yvonne Taylor, DEI Instruction and Research Lead at OpenStax.
And I am Sydney Roberts Cruz, DEI Manager at OpenStack.
We're here today with Elizabeth Adams to discuss data and bias in AI. Elizabeth Adams is an AI ethics and tech inclusion influencer, advisor, author, researcher, and keynote speaker and scholar practitioner. She's a fellow with the Stanford Institute for Human-Centered Artificial Intelligence and a chief AI ethics advisor for Paravision. Last year, she was a consultant to the 3C multinational and multi-stakeholder process for the Office of the Undersecretary General and Special Advisor on preparations for the 75th UN anniversary and the SG's roadmap for artificial intelligence digital cooperation. She's also been featured in Forbes magazine. Elizabeth, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you. I'm so super excited. I bring you greetings from Minneapolis, Minnesota, and I'm happy to have this conversation with you all today.
So, what would you suggest educational technology developers consider when developing new tools and processes to help mitigate or head off the introduction of bias and inequity in their designs?
I think that there's a couple of things that they can start with, and that is the understanding that we are all lifelong learners, and that as new information becomes available to us, we need to make sure that we have created agile practices so that we can consume that new information and then make those adjustments. But there are a couple of tools that I might suggest for developers to start with. One is called AI blind spots. It is a process that was developed by Harvard. It includes a 9-step discovery process for developers to actually go through. That information is free, that information is available. You can use it to work with teams. There's actually a questionnaire at the end that really helps you unpack where particular data bias might creep in, and so that you have these checks and balances through that process. The other one is called Mitigating Bias. It's an equity fluent leadership handbook, and it was developed by UC Berkeley. And again, they have a 7-step process for leaders who are influencing the development process, whether that is a technology manager or the vice president or whatever the title is. And again, it is an opportunity for teams to work together, technical and non-technical leaders, to understand how to ensure that you've built in equity in your design process so that you are mitigating bias. So I think that there are really simple tools that people can use that are easy to follow that will at least get you started. And then from there, you can kind of decide if you need additional training or materials to aid in that development process.
Thank you. I really appreciate the mention of those tools, and we will link to those in the course. Those will be very helpful.
Sure.
So you worked on a project with the Minnesota Police related to algorithmic bias. Can you talk more about that project and how it came to be and what you were able to demonstrate to them and the impact of that?
Sure, absolutely. I actually have a presentation. If you want me to pull it up, we can certainly cover that.
Would love for you to do that.
So it's just real quick. It's less than 10 minutes. And I just kind of want to cover, like I said, this particular project and what I went through. So let's just basically get started. So the Civic Tech Initiative that I worked on as part of my fellowship at Stanford is called POSTME, Public Oversight of Surveillance Technology and Military Equipment. I'm the founding member of POSTME, which is a local measure within the ACLU's CCOPS effort, and that stands for Community Control Over Police Surveillance. And we formed this coalition early last year in 2020 to begin advocating for transparency, oversight, accountability, and equity in the use of technology by the city of Minneapolis. And following the murder of George Floyd, we became particularly motivated by the use of artificial intelligence enabled systems by the city of Minneapolis, those tools that they had at their disposal. But our coalition did not come from a place of technophobia. Rather, our coalition was about embracing technology proactively, though, so that when these tools are implemented, communities have trust that they're being used responsibly and not to target certain populations or used by law enforcement to overreach in certain communities. But before we talk about that specific project, I want to just kind of quickly talk about what happens in the technology development lifecycle. When you are building a technology, you are starting your design and your concept sessions. But before that, you have budgets that are approved, team leaders are assigned, requirements and concept and design sessions are happening. And then you start working through development, operations, and new versions. And there are many hands that take place to help each particular part in the phase, in the life cycle, get to the next phase, whether you're talking about waterfall or methodology. But at this point, many decisions have happened, whether we're talking about technology developers going through systems testing, user testing, and then obtaining those results to determine whether or not you have the right product to go to market. But you're also involving additional stakeholders in the process. And at this point, this whole group has said, we have what we have to get to market. And I think it's really important to kind of understand what this is about, because this is the case for inclusive tech. But what happens when our technology worlds and our social worlds collide? All of this work and time and money that's been allocated to what seems to be an exciting initiative to advance technology, only to end up with what's happened on the right, only for technology to end up in society where a community unites to advocate for its ban. But what was missed? Well, the biggest impact from our post-me work happened this year, February 12th, when the Minneapolis City Council voted unanimously to ban facial recognition technology. And that was a huge community lift, because before you can even get to these headlines, you have to really understand the city process. You have to understand what's happening in the community. You have to understand so many different perspectives, the legislation process. But the question again I ask is why? Why should a community have to take up the mantle to ban a certain technology? And for me, the missing link is in humane engineering. It's the absence of the inclusion of the community experience as non-negotiable in how technology is developed, sold, and used in cities across the world. With our recent work in Minneapolis to ban facial recognition, I want to just share quickly a little bit about facial recognition at a high level. So we didn't initially seek to ban facial recognition. We were advocating really for community oversight. But after learning about the Minneapolis Police Department's use of facial recognition technology and the particular vendor and the particular biases that were coming out of this particular vendor's AI-enabled technology, we, along with the city, agreed to draft ordinances for a ban. But facial recognition is really a form of computer vision that recognizes a human face through technology. It takes images, it detects faces, and compares the face to data sets in your model to identify the face and the features. And a data set contains millions of images to train systems. And bias happens when there's a lack of diversity in training data, when the training data does not include an equal mix of ethnicities, genders, ages, and skin tones. And to take it one step further, a facial recognition tool is one that captures and identifies you by having created a face print. So again, it captures details of your face, it creates a unique face print, and then it tries to match your face in a database. And so facial recognition could be a promising tool to screen large crowds without invasive searches, but in reality, there are communities that have experienced a reinforcement of racial bias due to the lack of transparency and lack of regulation. As part of our research for PostMe, we also looked into various computer vision models to see if we could show errors in predictive labeling. And so in this particular example, we use Google Vision's AI, an online application that derives insights from your image. And in both pictures, a temperature is being taken with an infrared thermometer. But with the image on the left of the lighter skinned person and the lighter skinned hand, the algorithm predicts one set of labels, such as electronic device, photography, and possibly a mobile phone, but with a 68% probability that the image contains a technology. But with the image on the right of the darker skinned person and the darker skinned hand, the algorithm predicts and labels the items in the photo, such as a gun, photography, firearm, with an 88% probability that the image includes a gun. And so remember what I said earlier, which is bias happens when there's a lack of diversity in the training data, when the training data does not include an equal mix of ethnicities, genders, ages, skin tones, and associations. And this has been demonstrated to cause errors in predictive analytics. But let's take this one step further. So in this example, our coalition member lightened the image to see if the prediction would change. And as you can see, it did indeed change. And once the image was lightened, a gun was not predicted. What was predicted instead was a hand. So these are the types of technologies that are being sold and used by companies and law enforcement around the world. And law enforcement is using these tools to augment their work. And it's unfair to place the burden of algorithmic bias just on data scientists. There needs to be an integrated ethical approach, which is what I call inclusive tech design. So when you see these things I'm showing you, I want you to keep in the forefront of your mind that because of the absence of some sort of AI ethics, the standards, the processes, the policies, and the values that govern technology development, everyday citizens are doing the work of calling these things out. And the impacts to communities of color and vulnerable populations is great. So I want to real quickly talk about another use case where the absence of inclusion is occurring in the technology development lifecycle. So in this first example, I took three icons in the Black community, Maya Angelou, Cicely Tyson, and Shirley Chisholm. And I ran their pictures through an app that's supposed to show you what they look like as a portrait. And I also ran my photo as well, but the results have returned all of them back as white women, a total erasure of their look, their likeness, and their image. And again, think about all of this that has happened in the technology lifecycle way before the product makes its way to be sold. And in the next example, I was invited to participate in an immersive office experience where you get to create your avatar and you go in and you do your work with your colleagues in this immersive experience through an Oculus headset. And these images are what my avatar looked like. And I was initially excited because the marketing materials showed lifelike avatars. And I met with a company and I was told that they did not have the budget and or the priority to include inclusiveness in their design. So from facial recognition to predictive labeling to all of the avatars that you can see, you should be able to understand that inclusive tech should be a non-negotiable part of the technology development lifecycle, because these products not only have the potential to cause great harm, such as in facial recognition or predictive analytics, but there's also the exclusion and the ability to participate with colleagues through immersive experiences. So let's talk about preparing for leadership of AI. You can use a playbook for guidance to get started or evolve. As I've talked about before, the Equity Fluent Playbook or AI blind spots detail how data sets can harbor bias and outline strategies to mitigate them. Offer a course to your colleagues, start a learning event, which is how I got started in AI ethics 5 years ago, just having a conversation about particular bias in certain systems. And obviously you can read through the others, but supporting inclusive collaboration, creating safe spaces in your organization for people to speak up if they see something. And with that, I want to turn it back over and just say thank you for the opportunity to share a little bit about my work with PostMe, the Public Oversight of Surveillance Technology and Military Equipment Civic Tech project that I worked on with the Minneapolis City Council.
Thank you so much. That was really instructive. And I think it not only instructive and informative for our audience, but just again, with really practical information that people can use. I know that some of our discussions, folks have been concerned about time to market. And doing this work ahead of time, slowing down the process. And what your work is showing that the harm that can be caused, is, and not only to communities, but even to your own, whatever it is that you've designed, because if it's no longer usable for people and they're calling for its ban, time to market doesn't matter.
It's absolutely true. And I think as a program manager and a project manager, people understand agility, they understand iteration, they understand technologists typically understand that. So if you build this into your process, you're not going to slow innovation. There's other things that you need to consider when you're designing. Why shouldn't you consider inclusion, right? So that I think I really want people to take away from it. It can be a learning curve, but just like anything else. So I hope that people will take away, one, that this should be a non-negotiable part of your development process, specifically if you are designing for people that have different physical abilities, people from different countries, different languages. There are so many different things to consider, but ultimately just considering what are the impacts of your technology design. That's where I say to start.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.